Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be presenting you a short webinar around accessing early years support for children with a disability and a developmental delay. Before we start, I'd just like to do our acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on which our sites are held. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the first people of Australia. At Everyday Independence, we always start our meetings with our why. Our why is that we strive every day to lead and support individuals, their families, communities, and our nation to become a global leader for inclusion. So today, presenting to you is myself. So I am an advanced therapy mentor and an early childhood key worker based out of one of our Victorian Everyday Independence hubs. And we also have Karen, who is a child and family team lead and therapy mentor who is based out of one of our Adelaide hubs.
Welcome, everyone.
So during this webinar, what we'll cover is disability versus developmental delay, the NDIS and the early childhood services that they offer, the key worker model, which is a best practice approach for optimising outcomes for children, referral pathways for families. We're going to have a case study about a little boy called Sebi, and then we'll finish off with lots of time for questions and answers that any of you might have. So NDIS eligibility. So what we're looking at here is disability versus developmental delay. So the NDIS at the moment has two kind of application processes. One is for people aged 7 to 65. And for this age bracket, it requires evidence of a disability to be eligible for the NDIS. So to be eligible, the NDIS states that your disability is caused by an impairment and your impairment is likely to be permanent. Your permanent impairment substantially reduces your functional capacity to undertake one or more of the following activities. So moving around, communicating, socializing, learning, or undertaking self-care or self-management tasks. And your permanent impairment affects your ability to work, study, or take part in social life. And you'll need support under the NDIS for your whole life. And they have lots of eligibility requirements on the website. So this is for children 7 and above. But under age 7, so children aged 0 to 6 do not need to have a diagnosed disability to be eligible to access supports through the NDIS. So the early childhood approach supports children younger than 6 with a developmental delay or 7 to 9 with a disability to access the NDIS. Developmental delay is a term used to describe a delay in child's development. It means that a child finds it much harder to do everyday things than other children their age. So this might be dressing themselves or walking or talking, but we'll go into more detail about that a little bit further on. So a child with a developmental delay needs lots of extra help to do everyday things compared to children of the same age. So in summary of the last two slides, if we have a child younger than 7, they are able to apply for the NDIS without that permanent disability or diagnosis. But once they are age 7, the NDIS would be asking how they meet the eligibility requirements outlined on the website. And they've got like a list of eligible disabilities. So when we're talking about developmental delay, the developmental delay needs to substantially reduce the child's functional capacity in at least one major area of life activity. So the areas that we look at is self-care, so how they take care of themselves, shower, bathe, dress, eat, drink, sleep, toilet or groom, receptive and expressive language, listening, giving and receiving information, communicating wants and needs through facial expressions, vocalization, speech and interactions with others, cognitive development, so learning and applying knowledge and new skills, retention, planning, making decisions, problem solving, play skills, social awareness, safety awareness, emotional and sensory regulation, and motor development. So that includes participation in everyday activities like moving around the home and community and manipulating objects. So you have both your gross and fine motor development included in there. Something really noteworthy is that with the language, it could just be a receptive language or just an expressive language delay. So if your child is, or the child you're working with is say 3 or 4 and not using any expressive language, even if their receptive language is great, they're still eligible to apply. So when it comes to gathering the evidence to support the application, they'll request evidence from a health or allied health or early childhood professional about the child's ability to do everyday activities. This will include information that parents or carers report about their child. It may also include a mix of standardized assessments of developmental and functional capacity, both in everyday activities and natural settings. It should also include observations in everyday play, learning activities or routines to better understand how the child participates in these everyday activities. For very young children, where functional capacity can't be measured, the child may be eligible if there's a significant risk of a future disability diagnosis or developmental delay. We need evidence of this from an allied health or health professional's informed clinical opinion. So when you're thinking about whether a child would be eligible to apply for the NDIS, one piece of advice I would have is not to wait until you have gathered all of this stuff to start that application process with the family, because it can take quite some time. So making those initial referrals while gathering some of the information can be really handy as well. And the NDIS may always say, oh, we need a little bit more evidence, but you can continue to do that once you've started that application. Some resources that you might use in your early childhood setting to support determining whether there is developmental delay. The major one is observation of the child in the natural environment. So generally, we know as teachers whether a child is meeting the milestones that their peers are, if they're having a really hard time doing things that most children that age are able to do or are able to do with just that little bit of support. The Ages and Stages questionnaire can be really helpful in just looking at the child's overall development and seeing if there is any delay in specific areas. Looking at the developmental milestones in the early years learning framework can be helpful as well. And as well, another thing is the maternal child and health routine checks. So the 3.5-year-old check can be a really good one for determining whether our little preschoolers are struggling and might need that little extra bit of support. So if you're suspecting that a child in your care does have a developmental delay, there are some steps that we would recommend that you take. The first would be that ensuring that you have that positive relationship and rapport with the family before you even broach any of these kind of topics. When you're starting these conversations, sometimes it's quite helpful to pose it back and ask, oh, we've noticed that they're having a little bit of challenge around our mealtime routine here at kinder. What's that like for you at home? And that might be where, you know, the parent might open up and say, oh, I actually need to feed them at home. And then you're discovering a little bit more about that child. Sharing some of the concerns that you have of things that you've seen in the kinder. And, you know, I always try and talk about the things that are going really well for that child in that same conversation. But then just talk about some of those things that they might need that extra support with. So then another thing that we can do, and this is different because we've got to be mindful of all the states that we're covering here, is getting at some additional opinions or advice from early education specialists or advisors. So I know in Victoria, we have what's called the Preschool Field Officer program. So where you can get somebody to come out and take some extra observations focusing on that child and give some recommendations. Karen, you have something different over in Adelaide. What's that called out there?
Yes, that's right, Kate. We have Gowrie over here that supports with inclusion in childcare centres and will send out some of their specialists to do observations for these purposes as well.
Beautiful. Another thing that you could do is check if the maternal health checks are up to date. So that could be that could even be how you're starting that conversation with the family as well. You could be saying, oh, I've noticed a few of these things. Have you had your most recent check with your maternal health? And then another thing you could do is start to refer to the pediatrician. Sorry, everyone. But what I would do is be quite mindful of the wait list with that. Like I said before, you might start the process for the NDIS application at the same time if there is going to be a really long wait for that pediatrician. And then after that, we can refer to the NDIS or to some alternative services. So what we need to do is determine whether it's just a mild or moderate delay, to work out whether, well, should we be referring this family to access allied health through the GP or a community health program, or are there multiple delays? And are they really going to need quite a lot of support in multiple areas? So I generally use the rule that for community health or for, say, the Medicare supported allied health program where you can access some sessions at a reduced rate with an allied health professional, I would do that for somebody with mild delay. So for example, here we've said Tommy is a 4-year-old boy. He's a confident communicator, but can only be understood around 70 to 80% of the time. He has no other developmental concerns. So he's happy to communicate. He's trying to talk. His receptive language is great. He's social, but he does have some articulation errors there that are making him difficult to understand. I think in that case, we would just be looking for a speech therapist probably for this little boy, and we could probably do that through a community health or a private speech therapist and have some of those sessions funded with Medicare if we can. For the NDIS, it's when we're looking at a delay in 2 or more areas of development or a significant delay in one of the 4 areas of self-care, communication, cognitive or motor development. And that's where we might start to discuss early intervention eligibility through the NDIS. So for example, Sally, who is also 4 years old, can only be understood 70 to 80% of the time by her family, but does not communicate verbally in the kinder setting at all. She plays independently and is having trouble with toileting. So as you can see, there's a few different areas. We've got some issues happening with the self-care, probably some things with either the cognitive communication, but also cognitive as well. So there's a few things going on there for Sally. So when you're wanting to apply with the NDIS, you use the NDIS website and you find the Connect with an Early Childhood Partner. And there's different offices and contacts in different areas. And that's who will be your agency that support the family through the application process. Okay. So what we then know is best practice in early intervention is what we strive to do at Everyday Independence and follow the national guidelines for best practice in early childhood intervention, which are governed by some guiding principles, so that the service should be family-centred and strength-based, culturally responsive, focus on inclusion and participation, engage the child in natural environments, that it's a collaborative practice, and that it's capacity building practice and it's evidence-based and outcome-based. So what that means is when we're working with these children and families that might be experiencing developmental delay, our aim is to support them to reach outcomes that they as a family, with support from teachers and ourselves as key workers, they determine are important for their lives. So it's not about clinical therapy sessions that are aiming to increase a skill. It's about, well, what is affecting that child's inclusion? So say for little Sally, it might be, well, we really want Sally to be participating and communicating with her peers. And so our practice would be based around, well, how can we increase that inclusion and participation for her in her natural environment? Who do we need to work with to do that? And whose capacity do we need to build? All right, so now I'm going to hand over to Karen to give you a little bit more information about how we can provide best practice through a key worker model to support these children with disability, but also with developmental delays.
Thanks, Kate. So as Kate described, we follow some of these evidence-based best practices for early intervention. And for us at Everyday Independence, we offer the key worker model. The key worker model is really a holistic model, and the key therapist who's supporting the children and family, and we work together with all of the different supports that are in place, and that might involve other therapists, teachers, educators, the family, obviously. We work with the family at home and in any of their environments where they're experiencing challenges, whether that's childcare or school, or it could be at the local shopping centre, it could be at the local playground. So we really strive to work with the child the best we can in those areas. Thanks, Kate. So we're a team-based approach in terms of the key worker model, and the child and family are at the centre. And there's some more information here about key workers. Typically, we're teachers, early childhood trained teachers. We also have some social workers in the role, and we bring our expertise of child development, child learning and cognition in the different domains, social skills, behaviour and play, gross and fine motor skills, independence, language and communication, knowledge of educational environments and systems. We then work together with people with more specific strengths, for example, speech pathologists, if we're working with communication challenges, and they bring their own expertise in child development, communication, language, also around meal times with sensory and oral motor challenges, alternative and augmentative communication, AAC systems, social skills and behaviour and play. Our occupational therapists support with child development in independence of activities of daily living, sensory processing, social skills and behaviour, gross and fine motor skills, and environmental modifications and assistive technology where recommended. And we also have physiotherapists on board to support with gross motor skills, physical recreation and participation in health and fitness, and physical development and mobility, and positive behaviour support practitioners help with supporting capable families in increasing school and early learning engagement and reducing behaviours of concern. So our points of difference here at Everyday Independence are that we're very much a holistic child-focused practice, and we're all about strength-based versus disability-driven approaches. So rather than looking at what a child can't do, we're really looking about where the strengths of the child are and building on those strengths. We use the F words to describe all of the different areas that we support the family with. Often when families first start accessing therapy, there's a lot of focus on the function of the child, but it's really important that we have that holistic view, and we're looking at how is the child having fun? How is the child keeping fit? How is the child interacting with their family and their friends? And what are the future dreams and aspirations for the child and family? And as I said before, we always support in everyday environments. We don't have clinics at all. Everything is done within the child's environment. So I'm going to introduce Sebi to you here. Sebi is a young boy that I've been supporting for 2.5 years. And I think it's a really useful case study to show you the impact that a key worker can have for a child and family and the reach that we can have. So he's a 4-year-old boy. In fact, he's turning 5 next week. He lives with his mum and dad. When I started working with him, he was accessing early intervention through a developmental delay. So he didn't have any diagnosis at the stage that he was accessing early intervention services through NDIS. But over the past 2.5 years, we've received both a global developmental delay and an autism spectrum disorder delay. And he also experiences significant speech delay, which is one of the main reasons that he accessed the scheme in the first place. So his goals were around toileting routine and independence. He was full-time in nappies when I started working with him, to effectively be able to communicate his needs and feelings. So he was in a position where mum tended to understand a lot of what he was communicating, but his dad didn't, and his early educators also didn't, which led to some frustration for him, as you can imagine, which then led to behaviour. Engaging positively in his evening routine. He didn't like to have bath, didn't like to get wet at all, did not like anyone touching his hair, and to transition positively from a preferred to a non-preferred activity when he was engaging in community activities. So mum and dad had a lot of difficulty when trying to take him, for example, to the beach or to a playground, and then at home, when it was time to come home, he would have meltdowns, which the family found really challenging. So those were our key areas that we were working on with Sebi when I started with him. So as the lead therapist, and my background is in early childhood and special education, I worked really closely with Sebi and his family initially to get to know the family and to really understand what the barriers were for Sebi. And then as time went on, I was able to bring in some of our other therapists to support in particular areas. So, for example, I brought a speech pathologist consulting quite early because obviously he had communication challenges happening. One of the benefits of this model is that we can bring therapists in and out as we're providing therapy. So with the speech pathologist, when she came to visit with him initially, she was happy that the play that I was doing with him and the language stimulation was what he needed at that time. He wasn't in a position at that time to do any of the more focused articulation activities that she would recommend for the particular disorder he experienced. So we were able to just continue to keep bringing her in every 2 months to do a little bit of an assessment. And then when it came to a stage where he was able to sit for longer and engage in activities with the speech pathologist, she then did a longer sprint with him to work on those articulation challenges. With the occupational therapist, again, we brought an occupational therapist in quite early to help complete a sensory profile and to get a little bit more understanding of his sensory challenges to help with some of the routines that we were working on. And we also got a physiotherapy consult in because when we did some playground visits, I did notice he was very reluctant to step up onto higher equipment. So the physio was able to come in, check that everything was developing as expected, and then we could plan some activities to work on those challenges as well. All right, so alongside therapy, key workers engage in a lot of other supports with families, and that can vary significantly from family to family. In the case of Sebi's family, Mum was feeling quite overwhelmed by all of the options that were put on the table for her in terms of preschool, school, how to use the NDIS plan. So she found it really helpful to have some separate capacity building sessions while Sebi was at childcare to talk about what the NDIS plan was for, how it worked, what she could spend the funding on, and to discuss how best to split up the funding to work for Sebi. We also explored preschool options and more recently school options. So we went to visit a few different options around her so that she could see what might be available and what will be the best setting for Sebi. Throughout the latest plan period, we also supported her to put in for a change of circumstances when Sebi received his autism diagnosis so that she could receive some more funding for that intensive therapy early and also move to a managed plan. And also lots of coaching for the parents in using the items that they have at home to play with and not feeling like they needed to buy therapy items, but actually using the items that they have to actually support Sebi's growth and development. With the childcare educators, so Sebi initially was attending childcare 2 days a week. They didn't have any experience at that time with children with autism and really didn't know how to, not only their main concern was managing his meltdowns, but really the problems began before then. So being able to provide the structure and routine and support he needed actually completely reduced the meltdowns to the point that he no longer had those. So by going in early, and they were very open to professional development, so I was able to provide an hour of professional development for the educators in his room, and then ongoing strategies to support him. He no longer had meltdowns and he was much more engaged and participating in his room. We also worked through transitions, so we introduced some keyword sign resources to support his communication and some visuals for toilet training, and also some strategies to build on those fine motor skills. And then we worked towards transitioning from childcare to kindergarten, and now he'll be starting school in January next year. So we'll be working on that transition next. And I think this is a really helpful visual for all of us to be seeing. I think we tend to have a little bit of a view of the therapist being all important, but you can see from here for a 1-year-old, then a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, the huge amount of time that they spend with their family and the tiny amount of time they spend in therapy. even building in then to when they go to childcare and school, you can see that purple wedge gets bigger. The family and the childcare or school are the most important parts of the child's life. So a therapist could come in and do a 45-minute session once a week, but really it's going to have very little impact on the development of that child. By the therapist coming in and capacity building with the family, with the educators, with the SSOs who are working with the child, we're much more likely to have that impact sooner and with much, much better results. So in the key worker model, but moving on from that, we share our skills and knowledge, we practice through life activities, and we support families and educators to practice those, and then we come back in and we can work on the next step, sharing our skills and knowledge. So when families come to us, we have a therapy cycle. We'll come in step one, and we'll meet the family and the child. We'll discuss what the vision is for the child, how the family would like us to support them, and be really clear that we can support in a lot of ways that families might not realise is a therapy kind of support. So I might go with a family to see a paediatrician, for example. Often families in these early years are so overwhelmed, and they go and see a paediatrician and they come out of the appointment and everything's just gone in one ear and out the other, and they really struggle to remember what they've been told there. So it can be really helpful for them to have that support early on. Once we've established what the vision is for the child, we'll do some focused assessments. So, for example, if the family are really concerned about meal times, we might go into the family home in the evening for the meal time and do some observations around what's happening then, what might be the barriers, and thinking of some strategies we might be able to support with. We don't always work within the 9 to 5 typical hours. We might do early sessions, we might do late sessions, depending on the needs of the child and family. Once we've done those focused assessments, we do a plan and we work on that together with the family. We'd usually work on 3 to 5 goals in one year of the planning period, but obviously that can be very flexible. If we achieve some of those early, we might add some new goals to the plan. And once we've got that plan in place, we start with the delivering of therapy. And as I said, that could be at home, it could be at school, childcare, wherever the child and family need it. Towards the end of the plan period, we'll look at reviewing our outcomes, having a chat with the family about how they think things are going, writing a report for the NDIS, which is one of the regulation requirements for us to do, and talking about what we want to work on next. We may advocate for more funding for the family if we feel and they feel that they need more supports, or we may continue with the same funding that we're working with and making sure that we're making the absolute optimum use of that funding. And then we start all over again. So we've included some resources here that you can have a look at to get a little bit more idea of the key worker model. Eki of Victoria runs a great podcast called Family Voices. There's lots of families speaking there from their own experience of having a key worker and how it's impacted their family. It's really valuable. And I think this is a really great resource to refer to families to when they're in those early stages and not sure how they're going to face the challenges that they've got. It can really be really reassuring to know other people have been in that position too. Reimagine Australia also has some great links in there and information on what is early childhood intervention and best practice, and the F words of child development. There's some great resources at Can Child there. So those links are wonderful to get a little bit more information. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much. And we'll open up now for any questions that you might have.
Karen, just very quickly before we go to the questions of the attendees, I just wanted to ask you to let everyone know, because Sebi did get a diagnosis during the time you worked with him under the developmental delay early childhood approach, what does that mean for him ongoing?
So now that he does have that diagnosis, it does mean that he will have ongoing access to the NDIS. He's now turning 5, so he will transition to the NDIS proper at some stage. Things are a little bit in flux at the moment with all the changes, but this diagnosis is enough evidence for him to now access full NDIS supports.
Wonderful. And he can continue working with you?
Yes, he can. That's right. So I'll be continuing to work with Sebi until he's well, I hope until he's 9, but we will continue to work together with the family and continue to review what's the best supports for them. It may be as he gets older that he may access more core support. So I'd say at the moment, probably I provide approximately 80% of the supports for Sebi, but as he gets older, it may be that I cut down on my support and we bring in more OT and speech, depending on what his needs are as he goes forward.
Wonderful. All right, let's open up to questions from everyone else. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks.